welcome everyone to our buildingSMART webinar today. This webinar is hosted by buildingSMART UAE chapter. My name is Ibrahim Fada and I will be your moderator today. Today's webinar is titled BIM and ISO 19650 Part 2, an overview. And our speaker is Gary Pattision, who is certification technical expert at BSI. This webinar is scheduled to last 1 hour with a short QA at the end. The webinar will be recorded and will be made available in due course. Before I hand over to our speaker, I would like to ask you kindly to keep your line muted for the duration of the presentation. If you have any questions or you wish to make any comments, please use the chat area for that. With that, I will now stop sharing my screen and hand over to Gary to start his presentation. Over to you, Gary.
Thank you very much. Let me just make sure to turn on my camera as well. Okay. Hi there, everyone. Yes, thank you. My name's Gary Pattision. So I'm a certification technical expert at BSI, based in the UK. So my role in BSI, I manage all of our BIM certification schemes, as well as our smart cities and communities certification schemes. So my role is to develop the certification products that we offer to ensure competency of our assessors. I've also done a lot of assessments myself. So basically anything BIM related is my area of expertise. I've done quite a lot of assessments internationally as well, so I'm aware of some of the challenges and differences in the application of BIM from country to country. Yes, please feel free to ask questions in the question box. Just as a caveat, our role, BSI, is a certification body, so we have strict guidelines that we can't offer any consultation. So the questions I will be able to answer are clarifications of requirements, anything that explains what BIM is, etc. Unfortunately, I won't be able to answer kind of what you should do, specific type questions. Just bear that in mind. Hopefully this will be first of a series of webinars, so look out for that in the future. Great. Okay, so what are we going to cover today? So I'm going to try and pitch this at a level, hopefully, where whether you're brand new to BIM or whether you're delivering it yourself, hopefully there'll be something in it for yourself, maybe something that you haven't thought about or missed. So firstly, I'll just kind of start from the kind of basics. So why does BIM exist? An introduction to the ISO 19650 framework standards. Some of the concepts and principles of BIM that are applicable across the whole landscape of BIM. And then I'll be focusing on some of the key process requirements of ISO 19650-2. So that covers the design and construction phase. A little bit about BIM adoption, so how we've seen that from our perspective, and then just lastly, just kind of what BSI does in this space in terms of assurance. Okay, so firstly, what's the problem? Why does BIM even exist? So we know that, in particularly, that BIM or projects are delivered typically by a group of organisations. That can be quite complex delivery teams with respect to size, experience, resources, culture, and we all know that the built environment is kind of rife with waste and inefficiencies in terms of process and time, which equates to takes loss of money, and a lot of this relates to lack of information management. So lost information, unclear use of information, unsearchable or unretrievable information, unknown ownership of the information, duplication of information. So you probably all be familiar with some of these examples in your own work. So the idea is BIM exists to save money by addressing these information management issues. So that's the problem. So the solution, as we know, is BIM. So BIM defines a set of processes for the definition, production, management, and exchange information generated during the design, construction, and management phase of the built asset. Okay, things that we look for with BIM. Okay, so there'll be two general aspects. So information delivery requirements. So that's what information do you want? So who's going to be producing the information? The format of the information, level of definition of the information, when's it required, how should it be named and classified, etc. And along with that, the management requirements of the project. So, for example, what are the security requirements for the access, storage, and distribution of the information? How is your delivery team selected? How should information be approved? What if you can't meet a specific information deliverable? How should the information be used, etc. So, summarizing all of that, we're eventually looking at the start with the end in mind principle, getting the right information to the right people at the right time, access and retrievability of information, trust in information, a collaborative approach, and we'll go into this in a bit more detail later. And what are the outcomes? Hopefully we're going to reduce waste, reduce time, and ultimately save money. So, of course, better information management can be executed at different levels of maturity. And what we see is the ISO 196 framework have set out a successive stage of maturity roadmap. So the idea being is we are future-proofing ourselves for a later date. We're currently working to what we call BIM Stage 2 maturity, as you can see in the image, and this is effectively BIM as defined by the 19650 standards. So if you're compliant to the 19650 standards for your respective role and place within the asset lifecycle, you are effectively working to stage 2 maturity. So we generally have three pillars to conquer, should we say, when mastering BIM or when implementing BIM. So the first is the people themselves. So of course, depending on where you are on your journey, BIM is effectively a new set of working practices, and therefore that may require training within your own organization, and it also may require some changes in attitude in the way in which projects are delivered. Ultimately, to be successful in delivering a BIM project, there needs to be a strong element of collaboration, and this can sometimes be challenging for individuals or companies that are obviously used to delivering in a more traditional way. So collaborative working is obviously a key ingredient. We then have the BIM processes themselves. So these are contained within the standards. So we follow the ISO 19650 framework standards, which I'll go into, and then there may be a national annex that's specific to your country. Again, I'll go into this later on. And then the last arm is technology. So of course, BIM is a process rather than a technology, but that technology can be used to enable and or support many of the BIM processes. So they do go hand in hand. Examples may be common data environment, which I'll talk about, model authoring and viewing software, clash detection, things like that. Okay, so that's my very short introduction of what the problem is and why BIM exists. So next we talk about the ISO 19650 framework. So the ISO 19650 framework is a series of international standards, largely based on the 1192 standards. So some of you may be familiar with the suite of 1192 standards. They were kind of in our view the the best place historically where BIM was defined, and that's what we used as the basis of our certification products at BSI. But one of the really good things is that these standards have been transitioning or migrating to ISO standards effectively, kind of on a one-to-one relationship. And this is really good because whereas the 1192 standards were British standards and PAS standards, the ISO standards are obviously have been developed through international collaboration. So it's really good we're at this space, and we have a series of 6 standards now, including a transition guidance standard. That's PD 19650-0. So that's if you're already familiar with PAS Part 2 and moving to ISO Part 2, that helps. So this is we're in a really strong place, and what we've seen as a certification body is there's been a huge uptake in international interest with BIM certification since the first publication of the ISO back in 2018, I believe. Okay, so a quick summary of what each of these standards includes, and then I'll be focusing on part 2. So ISO 19650-1, excuse me. So this sets out the principles of BIM. So it's given from a full asset lifecycle viewpoint. It defines some of the core outputs that are universal to BIM, such as OIRs, AIRs, PIRs, EIRs, AIMs, PIMs. If you're not familiar with the jargon, don't worry about that for now, but just know that it kind of identifies and defines some of these key outputs. It describes the information management functions. It sets the framework for the collaborative production of information, and it introduces the common data environment, or the CDE. Part 2. So this defines the specific BIM requirements for the design, construction, and commissioning phase of the asset lifecycle. And this is what I'll go into in a lot more detail. Part 3. This defines the specific BIM requirements for the asset management or facilities management phase of the asset lifecycle. Part 4. Now, this is still currently a BS 1192-4 standard. So ISO 19650-4 is in development. So this is the Colby standard. So Colby stands for Construction Operations Building Information Exchange. And this is a schema for the transfer of information of maintainable assets. Okay, ISO Part 5. So this defines how a security-minded approach should be adopted using the processes and outputs of BIM. And then lastly, we have BIM Health and Safety. So again, like Part 4, this is still currently in its PAS form, but the ISO Part 6 is in development. And like Part 5, this defines how health and safety information should be managed using BIM processes and outputs, as well as showing how health and safety can be improved using BIM. Okay. What we also have a mechanism which you may or may not be familiar with. We call it a national annex, and this is where through we had the series of BIM standards as defined by the 1192. In moving to an ISO, one of the casualties of should we say of developing an ISO standard is, as you need to have international consensus in what you often find is you get a dilution of specific requirements that are perhaps regionally specific that are taken from the standard because they're not as not applicable as much internationally. So what we have a mechanism called the national annex, and this is where any country can add any specific national requirements onto the standard that may be applicable just for them. So in the UK, we have a UK National Annex, and that's what we've done with the UK National Annex is we've put back some of the requirements we lost from the PAS in moving to the ISO. For example, the specific naming convention that needs to be adopted, specific status code requirements. So basically just a series of codes related to how you manage the information in the CDE. The use of COBE or BS 1190-4. Now there have been some other national annexes that I'm aware of, so for example, Ireland and Canada, but this is just a mechanism, an optional mechanism. You'll see that it's informative, so it's not, you don't need to comply with this as in order to comply with the general standard. Okay. So one of the key strengths of the BIM standards, and even more so with the ISO standards, is that they have been written to be compliant with some of our key system standards point of view. So you'll see on the left how the ISO standards map onto the asset life cycle from design, construction, in use, and decommissioning. And what we'll find is each of these standards, they almost have a complementary system standard. So obviously Part 5, ISO Part 5, BIM Security, is very much related to ISO 27001. So the idea is, in adopting these BIM standards, they should be complementary to your system standards. So if you have things like 55,001, 9001, 27,001, these types of system standards, for those of you that are familiar with them, we're not saying you should have a separate BIM system. These should be embedded into your existing system standards. So what are the benefits of adopting BIM through standards? So why should, you may be convinced with BIM, but maybe not convinced with following the standards in the application of BIM. Some of the things we feel that the strengths are is, you gain a common and consistent understanding of BIM. So this is within your organization and across different organizations. You can define clear requirements to your delivery team. Full BIM engagement from your delivery team. A BIM can be implemented across the full asset lifecycle. We see too often where BIM is just applied for maybe design and construction, and then when it gets to the in-use phase, then it discontinues. So this is something we want to avoid to get the true benefit of applying BIM. A standardized approach to the delivery, and helps maximize the benefit of BIM. So by adopting BIM, you're not necessarily going to save a certain percentage, but there's, as a certification body, we've definitely seen the whole spectrum of degrees of quality of BIM implementation. So this will help you. Obviously, the better you embed it, the more benefit you can get from that. In terms of some resources to help you, so the UK BIM Framework, this sets out an approach for implementing BIM in the UK using the framework. And it includes, it publishes the standards. It offers guidance, useful guidance materials, and also useful links and other resources. So there is freely available guidance out there. This is what the UK offer, but there may well be other resources internationally. But anyone can go onto the UK BIM Framework site and download any of the documents you see on the screen. Last one there. Okay, so how does BIM, as defined by the ISO 19650 framework, apply to different organizational functions, e.g. designers, contractors, etc.? So the standards are written in a function agnostic way. So it defines the information management processes and outputs, but doesn't define the actual outputs of those processes themselves. So these defined processes can be applied to all disciplines, where their specific output will be different based on your function and the specifics of your appointment. So this is one of the core principles of BIM. So define a common and consistent process across the entire project team. So carrying on with that thread of ensuring that BIM is applicable, not just for these, huge, construction projects, but all types of projects. And this is largely achieved by the structure of the clauses within the 19650 framework standards, which define their requirements. So those of you that are familiar with how standards are written, we have kind of a should versus shall type statements. So the should statements are recommendation, and shalls are requirements. And what you see is many of the clauses within the standard are written in this particular structure. So first we have a kind of statement 1, which defines which is a shall clause, and it defines the requirement itself. And then as the secondary paragraph within the same clause, it gives you a scope of applicability against that particular requirement. So you'll see here in this example I've picked from part 3. The statement 2 says, in doing this, i.e. the above, the appointing party shall consider. So and then it gives you a list of things to consider. So of course, for some projects, maybe only 1 or 2 of those are applicable, but for a larger project, maybe all of them are. So again, this is one of the mechanisms that the ISO standards use to give a scale of applicability of the ISO standards, which works really well. Okay, so I'm now going to put a bit more focus on the specific requirements of 19650-2, which covers design, construction and commissioning. Okay, so ISO 19650 defines key functions, as well as how these functions interact. So these functions are defined in a way that allows flexibility of application, depending on the nature and complexity of the project or asset. So at the heart of the project, we have the appointing party. So this is usually the project client, which is the person or organization responsible for initiating the project or approving the brief. But in more general terms, it's the receiver of information concerning works, goods or services from what is called the lead appointed party. So they're the Bs. In some countries, the appointing party can be termed client, owner or employer, but the appointing party is not limited to these functions. Okay. Next, we have the appointing party. Appointed parties are providers of information concerning works, goods or services. So we can see that the lead appointed party is the person or organization interacting directly with the appointing party or client. Sorry about all this jargon, guys. It's just the way the standards have been written. So a lead appointed party should be identified for each delivery team. So as I said, we've got the client in the middle, which we call the appointing party. They will directly appoint a lead appointed party. And then each lead appointed party will manage its own delivery team, which will be made up of one or more appointed parties, if you're following the logic. Okay. So what is the delivery team? This is the lead appointed party and their appointed parties. Okay, their supply chain. Now, a delivery team can be of any size, from one person carrying out all the necessary functions through to a multi-layered complex task team. The size and structure of each task team are in response to the scale and complexity of the project. Multiple delivery teams can be appointed simultaneously or sequentially in connection with a single project. Okay, and then finally we have our task teams, and these are individuals assembled to perform a specific task. Okay, so we'll see why I've kind of laid the point of defining all of these specific roles. And this is because, so as we've now defined the key BIM functions and their relationships, we can see that the clauses within the standard are assigned to these different roles or functions. Okay, in this way, there's a subset of requirements for each of these given functions. To promote flexibility of adoption, the ISO standards allows flexibility of the appointing party or lead appointed party, so that's the client or the tier ones, to delegate information management functions to other persons or organizations within the project team. And in doing that, they'll consider the tasks for which the respective lead appointed party or third party were responsible for, the authority of that appointing party, the competency of the individuals undertaking that function, where the appointing party appoints a prospective lead appointed party or third party to undertake all or part of the information management function. The use of the information management assigned matrix in Annex A can be really helpful. So what we have here is, for every clause in the standard, it assigns responsibility, i.e., a appointing party, client, or a tier one or a lead appointed party. So it assigns that, and then within the Annex A, there's a matrix that you go through clause by clause and assign who's responsible for each of the clauses within the standard. In this way, we have a real clear definition of who's doing what within the project. Okay, so one of the key outputs of the CDE, the key processes, should I say, of the CDE, of BIM, is the Common Data Environment, or the CDE. So this is addressing some of these problems that we looked at in our early slides. So things like lost information, out of date information, unclear use information, all of those red boxes. So the way in which it does that, so the CDE is an agreed source of information for any given project or asset. So that's for collecting, managing, and disseminating information management through a controlled process. So ensuring the information is, retrievable, searchable, secure, available, but ultimately there's trust within that information. So if information is stored within the CDE, you know the state of that information. Okay, so a CDE itself can be made up of different softwares. So for example, the whole information model is not always held in one place, particularly for large projects. So the CDE workflow can be distributed across different computer systems or technology platforms. Okay, so we don't necessarily mean it's one piece of software. The CDE describes 4 states that the information can be assigned. So WIP, shared, published, and archive. So some of you may be familiar with this, and it's managed ultimately through the use of metadata. So this is data about data, effectively, and through metadata we can define the state of the information, access rights and permissions, workflows and steps, notifications, approvals, authorizations, etc. So we see the strength of the use of metadata within the CDE workflow. So again, the CDE outlines a process for storing, managing, and sharing information across a simple or complex delivery team. And to be honest, this is kind of like a much larger subject. Yeah, I encourage you guys to research the CDE yourself. Okay, so in terms of the structure of ISO 1960-2, it follows the generally follows the chronology of a project. So we start with the assessment of need, moving on to the invitation to tender response. So that those organisations bidding for the contract, the appointment or contract award, mobilisation. So how the project team is going to ensure they're ready to start delivering, and then the actual collaborative production of information. So this is when you're actually producing the information during the project. Information model delivery. So so kind of your handovers, and then the project closeout. So so at the end of the construction, when it moves on to the when a particular project be it a building or infrastructure, moves to the in-use phase or the occupied phase. Okay, so let's start with the assessment and need. So this is where the client or the appointing party will produce some of these key outputs, and I'll just summarize some of these. So the first is the PIR, or the project information requirements. This defines the project scope, the purpose of the information needed, the plan of work, some of the key decision points, and questions to inform decisions as to, so the questions the client can ask themselves to ensure that specific information requirements have been met. We then have the information standard. So this is how information will be exchanged, the structure and classification of information, the assignment of level information need, and the use of information during the asset use. We then have the information production methods and procedures. This describes how information should be captured, how to create, review, and approve information, the security of information, and how the information should be delivered to the appointing party or the client. So these are four outputs that are developed by the client or the appointing party. Once that's done, we move to the invitation to tender. So this is when the appointing party will create a tender package for companies to bid on. As part of that, they will produce an exchange information requirements document, or an EIR. And this sets out everything that's in the assessment and need requirements, so the previous requirements, what supporting information is needed, and then the information delivery milestones for the particular project. So what you see in front of you is collectively how the information requirements are specified on a given project at tender phase. And this will all be carried out and managed within the common data environment. Okay, then moving on to the tender response. So each organization or lead appointed party, tier 1 organization, will respond to that tender package by developing a task team and delivery team capability and capacity summary. So this will ensure that the delivery team with the prospective delivery team working on the project will have enough experience, the ability to conform with any specific requirements of the project, identify any education and training needs, and identify the IT setup. We then have the information delivery risk assessment. This is a risk assessment carried out by the delivery team to identify what the consequences are for any non-timely delivery of certain information deliverables. Okay, so what happens if you can't deliver something in time? What are the knock-on effects of that? We then have the delivery team's mobilization plan. So this addresses software, hardware, and infrastructure, CDE, interoperability between platforms and softwares, information sharing, skills, knowledge, education and training, capacity. So the idea is you do a mobilization plan to ensure that you're ready to start delivering the project if you do win that tender. We then have the pre-appointment BIM execution plan. So this defines the information management team, the information delivery strategy, the federation strategy, the responsibility matrix, amendments to the production methods and procedures or information standard, and identifies the software, hardware, and IT infrastructure of the delivery team. So the BEP is the vehicle used to basically describe how that particular delivery team is going to meet the specific requirements of the project. Once the appointing party or the client has decided on the specific lead appointed party, their appoint, we move on to appointment. So here, once a given organization has been appointed, there'll be the next kind of key outputs required are there'll be a post-contract BEP. So again, this is a similar structure as the pre-appointment BEP, but the post-appointment BEP, this is when you actually give the detail about exactly how you will deliver it. Whereas the pre-appointment BEP was how you wish to deliver it. The post-appointment BEP is actually, what is actually going to happen on the project. As part of that, there'll be what we call a TIDP, or a Task Information Delivery Plan. This is the schedule information and delivery dates for each specific task team. So remember, a lead appointed party will typically be appointing multiple task teams, each of which will develop their own TIDP. So that'll be a schedule of deliverables. The lead appointed party will then consolidate all of those TIDPs into one master information delivery plan, or MIDP. Yeah. And then lastly, the completion of the information management assignment matrix. So this is kind of, who's doing what. Okay, so it's crystal clear. Okay, so once we've done that, we move on to mobilization. So before we had the mobilization plan, now we're actually moving on to mobilization itself. And again, this is ensuring that all the software, hardware, and infrastructure requirements for the project are good to go. The interoperability of the CDE, information sharing, so that's testing, testing information exchange within the CDE, identifying any skills or knowledge gaps that need to be addressed, likewise with education and training, and ensuring capacity to actually deliver the project. We next move on to the collaborative production of information. So first we have the generation of information. So each task team will generate information in accordance with their respective TIDPs. This will be in accordance with the information standard and the information production methods and procedure document that the appointing party or client produced. So we need to ensure that we generate information that doesn't exceed the level of information need, doesn't duplicate information, doesn't contain any additional information. We need to coordinate and cross-reference information, share shared information within the CDE, and we need to spatially coordinate geometric models with others. It then moves on to the quality assurance check. So again, each task team shall undertake a quality assurance check for each of their information containers in accordance with the information production methods and procedures. Okay, so we're not looking yet at the actual content of the information. We're looking at how the information was produced and kind of submitted, etc. We then move to approve for sharing. So each task team shall undertake a review of the information within the container. Okay, and again, this will be looking at the lead appointed party's information requirements. This is what we're cross-referencing it against, the level of information need, and the information needed for coordination by other task teams. And then lastly, we have the information model review. So this is where the delivery team as a whole undertakes a review of the information model in accordance with the production methods and procedures. And this is where we look at, for example, the appointing party's information requirements and acceptance criteria. We're ensuring that the deliverable is in line with the MIDP. Okay. We then move on to the information model delivery. So again, the first step, this is where we're issuing the information to the lead appointed party or the client. So prior to the delivery of the information model to the appointing party, each task team shall submit their information to the lead appointed party for authorization within the project CDE. Okay, this will then move to the review and authorization of the information model. This is where the lead appointed party will undertake a review and looking at the MIDP, the appointing party's EIR requirements, the lead appointed party's EIR, the acceptance criteria for each information requirement, and the level of information need for each requirement. Okay, then it'll move on to the submission to the appointing party. So here, each task team shall submit the information for the appointing party review and acceptance within the common data environment. And then lastly, the review and authorization of the information model. And this is where the same checks as we've described as before will be carried out, but this will be done by the appointing party or the client or client representative. So that was my very quick introduction to part 2. I encourage you to read the standard if you haven't done so already. So just a few kind of notes on BIM adoption as we see it as a certification body. So we've seen kind of 2 general approaches to BIM, where it's been a kind of a top-down and bottom-up specification of BIM. So initially, when we developed our certification products, it was mainly, to be honest, the tier 1 contractors that adopted BIM initially. That's I mean, there were exceptions, but generally that was the case. What we see now is we have a whole spectrum of different types of organizations that achieve BIM, from SMEs with 10 people through to government clients and everything in between. And what we also see is different countries specifying BIM in their own way, in kind of hard and soft mandates. So we have a particularly good one in the UK where which requires compliance against BIM for all publicly procured projects. In the UAE, I know, or in Dubai, I'm familiar with the adoption of BIM for assets above a certain height or above a certain area, depending on the nature of the project. And we see some other examples of how international governments are specifying BIM. Just in terms of, for those of you that haven't adopted BIM yourself, some of the steps that you may follow in ensuring BIM is fully embedded within your organization. So the need for a BIM champion internally, it would always be the first step. Executive understanding commitment, so getting buy-in from your leadership team. Adopting BIM processes within your organization. Ensuring that your IT and software is ready. Changing your working culture, that could be a big one. And then moving on to staff training to ensure everyone in your organization who needs to know is familiar with BIM and how it works within your own organization. And then the last line is delivery, turning theory into practice. So taking the theoretical standard and applying it in a practical way, again, in a way that works with your organization. And then that's all the red one boxes. So that's within your own organization. But then, of course, you have to convince your clients or your appointed parties and your supply chain or your appointed parties of the benefits, which, of course, can be challenging itself as well. But that's just the way we are, where we're going. In terms of some tips in implementing BIM, just a few tips to come. We think will help you out. So understand the real and practical benefits that BIM can bring to your business. Make BIM business as usual, not an extra. Don't wait to be asked to deliver BIM. Start using BIM processes yourself. Lead by example. Be prepared to support your clients and your supply chain to get the best of BIM. Treat software as a tool to support your business. And lastly, someone's already done the hard work for you by writing the BIM standards. All you need to do is use them. And of course, I'm being a bit flippant in terms of, I know that can be sometimes challenging, but we see that the rewards are definitely worth the effort in doing that. And just a couple more slides, just in terms of what we do at BSI. So we offer all types of training products covering all different aspects of BIM. We also offer Kite Mark certification against BIM design and construction, BIM asset management, BIM security, health and safety, BIM software. So any of your certification needs related to BIM is something that we can support, as well as training. You see some of the clients that we have. So we have over 400 clients now. Definitely very proud of our client list. You'll see all types of organizations in there, of all different sizes and functions. BIM has been particularly strong in the Middle East region. A few clients we work with, so RTA, BK Gulf, Red Sea. So these are some of the great partners that we have in your region that are already working with us in support of their BIM journey. And that's it from myself. If you have any questions, I think we're going to go through some questions now, but feel free to email me any questions directly, and that's part of my role. Yeah, that's it. So I'll pass back to Ibrahim to look at maybe some of the questions we have.
All right. Thank you very much, Gary, for the informative presentation today. I think us who really work in the construction industry need to be familiar with the standard that you presented today, at least to some extent. So I believe today's presentation by our speaker nicely really introduced the 8 phases of the asset delivery process, which is defined in part 2 of the ISO 19650. And hopefully in the near future, we'll have the chance really for more webinars to really introduce the other parts of this standard. So today was part 2, so maybe we'll get the chance in the future to introduce other parts. We can now really move to the questions. So please, if you have any question, place your questions in the chat area. Also, if you feel it's easier for you to ask your question directly, please raise your hand and pick up the mic and ask your question. So it's your chance now to ask our speaker any question you have in your mind. So any question?
I'll go through some of these myself. So the UAE doesn't have a national annex, to my knowledge. They may well be working on one at the moment, but they don't have one published. The only countries, again, to my knowledge, that do have a published national annex are the UK, Ireland, and Canada. I believe other countries are in the process of developing their own UK national annex, but to my knowledge, they're the 3 countries that have actually published one.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Gary, again for this presentation. Very simple, straightforward. But I actually have 2 questions, if you don't mind. The first one is regarding, if let's say we want to go through with the accreditation for the Kite Mark, for the ISO 19650 Kite Mark, are we required to meet the annex, the UK annex requirements? Because let's say, for example, I'm not going to drag this meeting on the revision control and all that, but we can have a separate discussion about this. But let's say we deviated a bit, or we want to change the revision control within this annex.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's one question. The second question regarding the term information model. Now, unfortunately, the way that the standards are written, when you say model, a lot of people just go thinking about the 3D geometrical file.
Yeah.
But I just want to clear, and I get a confirmation on this, is when we say information model, it doesn't mean that it's an actual 3D model. It's whatever the information in whatever container. So whether it's a drawing or an Excel sheet or whatever, and this all contributes as a PIM or AIM depending on the stage. I just want to get a confirmation on that.
Yeah. So
if you don't mind.
Yeah. So look, addressing your last question first. So you pretty much said exactly right. So this is just me confirming what you've said. So yes, the information model. BIM's a bit of a misnomer in terms of the actual jargon, like building information modeling suggests is a bit misleading. So yeah, I can confirm when we say information model, we're talking about that could be graphical and non-graphical. It could be documentation. So that's all the information collected, during a particular phase, and a 3D model will just be one element of that.
Exactly.
Yeah. So definitely concur with your understanding there. And in regards to the national annex, so firstly, all national annexes will be informative. So whenever a standard has a national annex, it will be designated either in informative or normative. If it's informative, that's a suggestion or a recommendation. So therefore, you don't need to comply with any national annex. So in the UAE, you don't need to comply with the UK national annex to be compliant with the ISO Part 2 standard. Okay. Now maybe that your client or your appointed party, they may say, as part of the specific requirements of the project, you need to be compliant with the UK national annex. That could be, but that's a specific project requirement rather than a general BIM requirement. So in that case, you would have to, but that's just because it's a contract requirement. So the UK national annex is there as an additional set of requirements if the project team feels they should be used.
Very well. Thank you so much, Gary.
Yeah, no worries.
I think we have a question on the chat from Steven. It says, what are the biggest challenges ahead?
So it used to always be the main blocker for general business as usual BIM adoption, i.e. where everyone's using it. It's just the way it is. The biggest challenge has always been client or appointing party kind of understanding and appreciation, because if the appointing parties really understand the benefit, they'll get from adopting BIM, not seeing BIM as kind of like this add-on, but like something that you can charge extra for, but seeing it as kind of an improved process. If they really understood that, they would be specifying BIM or mandating BIM on every one of their projects. And if that happens, then you've of course the delivery team have to comply, otherwise they're not going to win the contract. So the biggest challenge we've always had is proper, complete specification of BIM at the kind of client level. Now that's improved massively over the years. So our first BIM scheme was launched in 2016, I believe, maybe 15, and like it was much more of a bigger problem back then, where it's definitely improved now, but we're still not quite there yet. We're still not to the stage where BIM is just always specified as kind of business as usual, and I think that's the main challenge we have for BIM adoption. It's getting there, but we're not quite there yet.
All right. Any more question to our speaker? Don't see any hands raised. That looks like all the question we have anyway. I think we're running short of time anyway. So okay. I think that's for our sessions today. Do you need to add anything, Gary, before I close out the webinar today?
No, just if you do have any questions, you can contact me directly. This isn't intended to be a commercial webinar, but if you are interested in training or certification, again, please contact us, and look out for future webinars, for covering different areas of BIM.
All right, thanks, Gary. Okay, everyone, I think that's what we have time for today, really. Please reach out to us if you have any questions. Also, I may add, if you really would like to participate in a webinar hosted by buildingSMART UAE, please let us know if you have any idea, and we can work together to help you with the preparation and the setup of your presentation and webinar. I think that's it. We reach now the end of our webinar. I thank everyone for joining us today and hope to see you soon. Have a good day and bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Take care.